Today's episode deals with some topics that we don't like to think about, let alone talk about. When your child or your teen is in crisis, engaging in self destructive behavior, or having thoughts of killing themselves. It was important to me to make sure this episode was not just about how to handle these really tough and intense scenarios when you're in the thick of it, but also about how to prevent it from happening in the first place. And I'm honored to be joined by Katie K. May. She is a licensed therapist, an author, a speaker, and a group practice owner. And she has lived experience and tons of professional experience with these topics. Katie literally wrote the book on this. It's called You're on Fire, It's Fine: Effective Strategies for Parenting Teens with Self-Destructive Behaviors. I think you're going to get a lot out of this episode, no matter what stage you're in, and I really hope you find it helpful. Welcome to Single Parenting with Connection, Not Perfection, the podcast that honors your messy reality. It's the support you crave without the usual emotional landmines. I'm your host, Dr. Gila, and I promise I will never tell you to just tag your partner in. Before we start, quick reminder. While I am a licensed psychologist and a certified coach, this podcast is not coaching and it's not therapy, and it's not a replacement for medical or psychological advice. It is for educational and informational purposes only. All right, let's dive in. Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for being here. I'm so excited to talk about all things teens.
Yes, we have not covered a lot about teens, and specifically, I know your interest and your specialty is with some of the more like intense things that can come up with teens, and I know that that's probably something that parents would love some support around. So, tell me a little bit about what it is that you specialize in.
Yeah, so I'm a therapist in the state of Pennsylvania, and I specialize in working with high risk teens and their parents. And I lead a
Mhm.
team who all specializes in this as well. And so when I say high risk, I'm saying things like self harm, suicidal ideation, sometimes substance use, a lot of those self destructive behaviors that show up when someone is really hurting.
Mhm. Yeah. Really intense for the kid and also for the parents.
Can be really scary for them.
Yeah, and I know this is something that you have some personal lived experience around as well.
Yeah, I self-harmed as a teen. I was raised by a single father who was thrown into being a single father and didn't really have the skills for parenting in general, let alone the skills to parent a very sensitive, emotional, reactive teen like me who was struggling because I didn't have a mom in my life. And so it was my coping strategy to get me through a lot of difficult years. And through that process, it gave me a lot of insight into what it does and how to understand it. So, as a professional, I felt really passionately about being able to do this work and help others.
Mhm. So, really understand where the behavior was coming from, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So, when someone is experiencing big, intense emotions, for me, I look at it as they're on fire with those emotions. They're
Mhm.
big and overwhelming, they're all consuming. And so, when we can look at it that way as parents and professionals, adults looking at this child, teenager who's hurting themselves, but when we can understand that the hurt inside them is so big that this is their brain's solution to make that fire go out quickly or to make that pain come down quickly, it's a helpful perspective to understand and validate them while also feeling really worried and scared about the behavior that's showing up for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I often reference that iceberg metaphor,
Mhm.
right? That the behavior that you're seeing is that tip of the iceberg that we see at the top, and there's so much more going on underneath. And it sounds
Yes.
like, yeah, that's what you're saying. And so, and I know you mentioned like this was your coping strategy. We hear a lot about
Mhm.
that, like coping mechanisms, coping strategies. It's a bit of a buzzword. Can you unpack that a little for anyone who's listening, what we mean by that?
Yeah, so people engage in behaviors to help them get through difficult situations. And it's really anytime something happens, whether it's a situation or an emotion that is bigger than your ability to handle it and stay present with it, that a behavior is going to show up to help you cope. And for some people, that's an impulsive or self-destructive behavior. So when someone is self-harming or is experiencing suicidal ideation, I term it like an escape behavior because even the thought of it or idea of it is allowing some level of daydreaming, of not having to be in a very difficult situation. For other
Yeah.
people, it shows up differently, like school avoidance or avoiding situations, dulling them with drugs and alcohol. So these are all just examples of unhealthy coping strategies that unfortunately are very effective. They work to help folks cope quickly.
Right. It's like if you can't physically get away, you're emotionally getting away or
Exactly.
yeah. Yeah. And I imagine that early, like catching these things early is one of the keys. And well, certainly, ideally, prevention.
Sure.
I'm really struck with what you were saying about your personal lived experience, your origin story, as it were, that
Mhm.
you feel like it came from this place of maybe having a father who wasn't equipped to give you what you needed. Is that accurate?
I would say so. So what it came down to was I was an emotional sensitive teen, just my predisposition. And then
Yeah.
the experience of my mom abruptly no longer being in my life was really painful. But the what happened was the people in my life, my dad included, were not great at acknowledging that pain because I assume, looking back on it, that he was experiencing his own emotions and his own pain. And so other people in my life would cope by not talking about things, by kind of ignoring the problem. But for me, that felt very dismissive and very invalidating because I was a teenager thinking like, does anyone else see what's going on here? Are we going to talk about this? Like, why isn't anybody acknowledging this? And so
Yeah.
when I think about the skills that I wish my dad had, that I think any parent would need in a situation when they have a child who's struggling, validation comes to mind as a primary skill of being able to say, I see that you're hurting. I know this is hard for you. Even if you don't have a way to solve it, that would have been the skill that I think could have changed the story a lot sooner for me.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful message, right? I mean, and anyone who's listening, like if you have younger kids, or certainly there's always, no matter what age your kids are, if you are in a situation where there's hard stuff going on, maybe there's
Yeah.
divorce, maybe a parent died, maybe, and it's hard to know, do we name this? Do we talk about it? Do we just sort of try to act like things are as normal as possible? And it sounds like from your experience, what you really needed was for it to be a little more out in the open and talked
Mhm.
about and in a compassionate way.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of parents fear naming what's wrong. I've heard that a lot. Like, I don't want to make it worse. I don't want to feed into it. If I say something, is it going to put an idea in their head that wasn't there before? So that I understand and can empathize with how hard it is for parents to actually have these direct conversations with their kids. And at the same time, a direct conversation could be the difference between them feeling alone in this or feeling seen and heard and understood
Yeah.
in it.
Yeah, it is a tricky sort of balancing act. I vividly remember a training in grad school on suicidality where the
Mhm.
person said, don't ask if they have thoughts of hurting themselves, but how often.
Mm,
And I thought that was really interesting. But then more recently, there's been a lot of conversation about, is it causing harm when a teen goes to the ER for something else and they are asked about suicidality? Are they putting ideas in their head? Is this sort of
mm.
bringing this more to the forefront? I'm curious if you have thoughts or experience with that, like if parents are worried about even asking about if their child has thoughts of hurting themselves or killing themselves, if that
Mhm.
is harmful or if that is helpful, or is there like more nuance to it?
I think there's always nuance. There's 2 sides of this that I see. On one hand, if I do have a child in front of me, my own or a client that is experiencing depression, then I think it is my due diligence to ask about suicidality, to be comfortable saying, "Do you want to die?" Right? Because if I can't say the words and I feel uncomfortable, how could they ever feel comfortable saying those words back to me? But then on
Mm.
the other side of that, I think about folks that are depressed and maybe have had past suicidal ideation, but then suicidal ideation becomes the benchmark for how bad it is. And so if we say, "Oh, are you suicidal or not?" And if they're not, it's almost like they have to prove how depressed they still are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it is one helpful assessment point, but it doesn't mean that someone isn't struggling if that's not present. So I never want to invalidate by not hearing or holding space for lower levels of sadness, depression. It's not quote unquote bad enough if the suicidality isn't there.
Right. I think that's such an important point because often these high risk behaviors are a way of sort of screaming from the rooftops, right? No one is noticing that I'm distressed. So I need to
Mhm.
do something extreme, and then that will sort of raise the alarm bells. Yeah.
Well, I think that's what happens. I used to work in inpatient and partial psych hospitals, and that was what happened a lot is that if parents couldn't hear the lower level emotions, and by hear, I mean like respond or sit with it or be present or take them to therapy or offer them warmth and attention, that it was almost like they were taught, not on purpose, but they were taught that they had to increase the urgency or safety risk of it in order to get their
Mhm.
needs met. And that's where sometimes I'll hear parents or professionals say things like they're being manipulative, but it's not
Mhm.
necessarily that they're intentionally manipulating, but they've learned over time, this is how I get my needs met.
Yeah. Oh my God. That is one of my pet peeve words, manipulative, right?
Yes.
Because I mean, if you think about it, right, like if you think of manipulative as this is someone who is trying to get their needs met in the way that they know how, then
Mhm.
I guess, yes, they are. But manipulative has such negative connotations. Like you're
Right.
trying to dupe or trick or like, contort the situation when really this is a child or teen or human adult in
Yeah.
distress and they are trying to get their needs met. And if we can't see their distress when it
Mhm.
isn't alarm bells ringing, then the alarm bells are gonna, well, not always, but they may escalate to
Yeah.
that level. Yeah.
Well, I think there's another side of that, and I teach behavior patterns when I'm working with teens and parents is if every time a self-harm behavior shows up or every time a self-destructive behavior shows up, a parent comes up and sits on a teen's bed and they offer warmth and they say, "I'll call you out of school tomorrow. Let's go out for ice cream tonight." Well, they are getting their needs plus 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 met, right? They're getting a lot of warmth, a lot of attention. Again, that's where we hear attention seeking come in. But we have to acknowledge that the parent is playing into this pattern and that if we want to shift the pattern, the parent also has to shift their behaviors. And so, what I'm always suggesting to parents is if you're only giving warmth, attention, deep talks after a self harm behavior, you need to do that more consistently in measured doses, not just in response to things that are scary for you.
Yes, I actually just did an episode about whether giving attention during a tantrum is
Mm,
rewarding the behavior and reinforcing it. And it's exactly right. I said exactly what you're saying that, yes, to some extent, if the only way that the child gets your attention is by having a tantrum or a meltdown, then it probably will reinforce and sort of
mhm.
exacerbate. But the answer is not to withdraw attention when they need support in that meltdown
Right.
moment. The answer is to build in attention at other times so they don't need to resort to that to get your attention. Yeah.
100%. Yep.
Yeah.
And it doesn't change throughout your child's age range. The behavior just changes, right? But the whole
Right.
function behind it, the principle you just explained so clearly stays the same. It's just different behaviors at different ages.
Yeah. And I do think that we're starting to see self-harm and sort of thoughts of death and suicide at earlier and earlier ages. It's
Mhm.
really upsetting. I've spoken to parents who, and sometimes there's like head banging or hitting head that it's hard to know if that's
Mhm.
the same type of self-harm behavior, but it's upsetting to the parents.
Of course.
And right, so that principle applies. I noticed when you said how you ask the teen, you said, "Do you want to die?"
Yeah.
That feels different to me than, "Do you want to kill yourself?"
Hmm. Yeah, you're right.
So I'm curious, is that like, do you have tips on if a parent is concerned? Like, is that
Mhm.
how you start that conversation? Are there ways that are more productive or less productive to start that conversation?
Yeah, I would say there are different steps that I would take. I would start with speaking directly. My starting point typically is, do you want to die? That the ideation part of it, like, are you thinking about killing yourself? Do you want to die? But then I would go more into intent. Like, this is the question I find myself asking on a scale of 0 to 10. If 10 is that you're going to kill yourself today and 0 is that you're not, where are you on that scale today? So I'm understanding how high their intent is based on whatever thoughts that they have. And I might ask some qualifying questions, like if they're at an 8, okay, what would get you to a 7? What would push it up to a 9? So I'm understanding some of the triggers and environmental stressors. And then I'm always educating parents on removing any access to means of self harm in the home. So being able to make sure that they don't have access to pills or sharps or chemicals that could be life threatening for someone if they're in a moment of high impulse. And along with that, how can we all, professionals, parents, adults that are supporting teens, manage our own nervous systems, manage our own anxiety as hard as it is in that moment? Because
Yeah.
when a child looks to you and they're saying, I want to hurt myself, or I'm thinking about dying, or any variation of that, they're scared and there's a lot of shame. And so, what I've heard over and over and over again, and all of my clients are depressed and chronically suicidal, is, if I say those things to my parent and I see their face crumble, or I hear their tone change, or I see that it's making them fall apart inside, it hurts me to hurt them. And I feel like they can't
Mm,
handle it. And I don't want to tell them anymore because I want to protect them or I don't want to disappoint them. And so it's such a hard place to be, right? Because as a parent, of course, you're crumbling when your child is saying, I want to hurt myself. So I typically encourage managing your face, managing your pace, like how frantic or urgent is it, and being able to regulate and then seek your own support after to vent, cry, fall apart in the shower, on a walk with a dog, whatever, because it's very valid. But we need
yeah.
to be the strong response for the teen who's struggling so they can lean on us.
Yeah. Emotion regulation, it always comes back to that, doesn't it? I mean,
Always.
it's the first step for parents.
Yeah.
Yeah, so important. Thank you for sharing that. I think a really helpful insight from the mouths of the teens, right? That they
Hmm.
are seeing our responses as the parent and they are then trying to manage our feelings about it, right? They have their
Hmm.
own big feelings that they're already struggling to manage and now if we put on top of that our feelings that they need to manage, it's an
Hmm.
added layer of burden from the sounds of it.
Yeah.
So what is a parent like what is the goal in that conversation? So what are you aiming for in that conversation and how do you keep yourself from going down that panic spiral? Oh my God, my kid is suicidal.
I think first is just having a phrase to convey that you're glad they told you. So
Mm,
something like, thank you for trusting me. I'm so glad you came to me. Something verbal to reinforce that they're in the right place by coming to you and you're glad that they did. Because that's one of
yeah.
those behaviors we want to see more of is coming to support people before acting on urges. That's part of what, when we're trying to reduce actions, we want them to come to support people before they act. So saying thank you for trusting me, whatever your child needs for support is an important next step. So could be giving them a hug or sitting with them. For my child who does not like to be hugged, it could be something like, hey, I'm here with you. I'm going to sit on the couch in silence. If you want to talk to me, I'm here, but otherwise I'll just sit with you. So something that keeps you in the moment with them, that shows your support without rushing in to fix, giving them
Mm-hmm.
that opportunity to share any emotions and thinking about pausing to give them that space to talk if they're maybe they don't have the words just yet, but they might in 10 seconds if you don't jump in to talk.
Yeah, and what strikes me is like in that moment it probably is easy to feel like that urgency, that panic, that oh my God, they're suicidal, I need to do something right now.
Yeah.
But the reality is, unless they're telling you this, with a gun to their head or a knife to their neck or something like that, God forbid, that, when they're telling you that to maybe hold on to this knowledge that, like, in this moment, right, moment to moment,
Mhm.
in this moment, they are not going to kill themselves, right? In this moment, we are
Mhm.
safe. We are here together.
Yeah.
And getting through that moment is the
Mhm.
goal and being able to take that pause and give them that space to be in that moment, right? To remind yourself, okay, they're not killing themselves right now, right? I'm not
Yeah, that's the
ignoring it,
difference
but
between talking about an urge or having taken an action. So I would say it's very different if a teen comes to parent and says, I just took a whole bottle of pills. Well, then you're taking an action to keep them safe and it is more urgent. But if they're
right,
coming to you and they're saying some variation of I want to hurt myself, then what they're saying, their words are telling you, I'm in so much pain inside and I'm coming to you because this is hard for me to hold or I'm scared by this. So they're coming to you because there's something underneath of that, going back to the iceberg or being on
hmm,
fire and trying to put the fire out. So this is your moment to pause and wait. And then it's also okay to say something like, I'm really sad that you're struggling and I'm here with you and I can handle this. I don't have an answer, but let's figure this out together or let's find you a therapist or, what support do you need? Any variation of something that says like, we can't fix this right away, but I'm here with you for the long haul so that you don't have to do
yeah.
this on your own.
Yeah, and I would add, I think sometimes it's tempting to say like, "Oh, you're just being dramatic," right? Or something like that, and that is dismissive. Yeah.
For sure. That's one of those examples of invalidation that's like minimizing, dismissing, or simple
Yeah.
solutions. Like, you know what? This is just a hard year at school. It's junior year and it's really stressful. You don't want to die. You just need to get through the year. Like anything that's um, dismissing or oversimplifying can be really hard and
Mhm.
misses the mark for what's actually going on.
Yeah. In both of our examples of that, we used the word that I call the great minimizer, the great dismisser, which is the word just. If you find
Mm,
yourself like wanting to say, it's just this, or you just need to this, I think that's a flag that you are being dismissive and
yeah,
invalidating. And it might be true, right? It might be true that this is simply a hard year and they will be better down the road. But in this moment, what they are feeling is valid and is that we need to treat it as real and valid and worthy of attention. Yeah.
absolutely. I like that. The just as the red flag that it's minimizing.
Yeah, yeah. So if a parent is in this situation, like what is something to look for of, okay, we need to call 911, for example, or drive to the ER
Mhm.
versus this is something that can wait. I can reach out to someone tomorrow. What are some things you should look for?
I have a lot of strong feelings about rushing to crisis or calling 911 because I think that sometimes hospitalization is not the right place and least restrictive level of care, being able to manage triggers, stressors, relationships, challenges in the life that we have where they're happening can be more effective if there's an ability to keep someone safe. So I think
Hmm.
about some specific data points, one being the protective factors, like how solid are the home relationships? What's rooting this kid to actually wanting to stay alive? What's keeping them here? Even if it's just my cat, and I would never kill myself because my cat would miss me, that's enough. I
Yeah.
also look at those acute risk factors. So, if the home environment is highly critical, if there's a lot of conflict, if someone has a lived identity that is not being affirmed, those are risk factors that make it more likely that when your kid is in their room at night and everyone's asleep and they're feeling lonely and they feel like they can't go to anyone or wake their parent up, that makes risk higher. And then I
Hmm.
also look at how well kids can be monitored in the home. And so the older a kid is, the harder it is to monitor them because they have a lot more independence and autonomy. But I think about like if parents or at least one caregiver can be in the home or an aunt or another natural support person can be in the home to help monitor, then that makes it easier to say, okay, let's defer this. Let's see if a good night's sleep makes this a little less intense for you. But if, I think about a single parent who works nights or who has other children and has this fractured attention, it makes it a lot harder to monitor. So those are some things that I might say, let's figure out a plan sooner rather than later because
Yeah.
it only takes one impulsive moment for things to change.
Yeah. And so would you say if you have like, pretty real concerns about self-harm that they should not be alone? Is that
I would say there's a difference for me between self-harm and suicidal ideation. If someone is having
Yes.
suicidal ideation and they're telling you on that 0 to 10 scale that they're 6, 7, 8 out of 10 intent to act on suicidal ideation, they should not be alone. They should be down in the whatever room everyone gathers in, kitchen, dining room, family room. If someone is having high urges to self-harm, I would again see if they could spend time with someone at least for the next hour or two because urges don't last forever and typically they come down. But I wouldn't say that they need to be monitored all night sleeping on the floor in their parents' bedroom. I think that they can handle going back to their own spaces once things have decreased a bit. And it's
Yeah,
going to look different depending on the person too.
and thank you for clarifying that because I think it is a really important distinction. If your
Mhm.
child is cutting, for example, that doesn't necessarily mean that they want to die, right? These are very
Mhm.
different
Very different.
presentations. Yeah.
Yeah, related actions sometimes, but different different function behind them, I would say. They both are
Yeah.
somewhat an escape behavior and a regulator, like they help someone to feel better in the moment. But someone who is cutting does not necessarily want to die, and I've actually seen it for a lot of my clients, it blocks them from ever getting to the point of suicidal ideation, meaning like, well, if I didn't cut and get those emotions to come down, I was worried they would have gotten to the point where I wanted to die and I don't want to die. So,
Yeah.
it seems so counterintuitive to say I cut myself so that I didn't want to die, but that is something I see a lot.
Yeah, because cutting often is how they feel, right? You mentioned making sure that they don't have access to, anything that could hurt themselves. I imagine
Mhm.
that's really hard. I mean, if you have a kitchen, like, do you get rid of all knives and forks? Do you have tips
So
for parents?
it's a little bit of like it's it's a hard conversation, and the way that I have it is that, typically if someone is suicidal, they have a plan for how they would want to hurt themselves, or if someone is cutting or using some kind of apparatus to harm themselves, they usually have a tool somewhere in their room, so they have a preferred method. And so we're talking about that specifically of like, can you bring that razor that you got from the hobby store to your parent so that it's not in your room and you have easy access to it? Or if
Mm.
I've had clients who drinking bleach, as scary as that is, like that's their suicide plan. So can we lock up the laundry detergents? But I also see the other side of that is if someone wants to harm themselves, they're going to find a way. There's lots of methods. So it's not a matter of living in a bubble. It's just making the preferred means less accessible for those moments of high impulsivity.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also wanted to sort of highlight something that you implied, I think, which makes sense that it seems like if a child or teen or adult, if a
Human.
person, if a human is talking about it, if they are answering your questions about intent, about how they would do it, about how likely it is, that is inherently less risky than the person who is not willing to talk about it at all.
I would
Is
say
that
so. I think as a therapist, those are the scariest cases when you can't clarify how high the risk is. And that makes everyone understandably more uneasy because there's less information to help us assess.
right?
And yet there's probably still signs there that help you understand level of risk. I always in the calm moments, I'm trying to get that information. So what happens when you're really dysregulated or really flooded with your emotions? Do you shut down and lose your words? And if so, then that could be a helpful sign for us because we know lots of people lose their ability to think clearly, articulate when they're really stressed or really overwhelmed. And I would say, especially the neurodivergent teens that I work with, it's a struggle for them to really find their words when they're completely overstimulated. And so I think having that information to the best of your ability in advance and some shared language is helpful. So for parents and teens, I'll often recommend like, can there be an emoji system where there's like an SOS emoji, or can there be a code word if you say like banana pants? It means, which is silly, but something you don't say every day that
Yeah.
that can really indicate like I'm at a crisis moment, but I can't say those words right now.
Yeah, and that can also be helpful if they're with other people and they're self-conscious
Mhm.
about saying the real words. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. Lots of helpful info in here. Any like last tips or sort of main message that you want parents to hear if they are concerned about their kids or teens?
Yeah, I always like to say parents go first. So if you have a kid who's struggling, if you have a kid who's experiencing self-harm or suicidal ideation, that a therapist will likely recommend that they learn certain skills. And it's helpful for parents to also learn those skills. So there is a shared language at home so you can model using those skills. So everyone in the family is moving towards a different way of managing emotions and they're seeing you do that work too.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And so in line with everything we talk about on this podcast. So thank you. Before we go, I like to ask guests two questions. The
Mhm.
first is there something that you do, or can you share something that you do that fosters connection in your life, whether it's with yourself, with a kid or teen in your life?
Yeah, so I'm in a very neurodivergent household, and a way that I like to share with my teen and they like to share with me is we share TV shows, we share content, comedians, music, things like that. So when we can sit together and share content, we're on the same wavelength and really can enjoy each other's company in a way that feels aligned with how my teen's brain works and that feels really meaningful to me.
I love that. We often think of screens equals bad, but actually it can
Mhm.
be such a beautiful connection point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And is there some place in your life where you have embraced imperfection?
Everywhere. I would say I'm very much a person who learns by doing rather than perfecting. And so everything that I've done, I wish that I could give you a specific example right now, but everything I've done just by saying it, putting myself out there. I mean, I wrote a book that started as social media posts that I imperfectly shared and was getting feedback that it needed to be a book. And so that was really just these breadcrumbs that led me to this bigger mission that I have, which wouldn't have happened if I waited until it was perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see that you have a free chapter that folks can sign up for your book. Do you want to tell them a little about that?
Yeah, so I wrote a book called You're on Fire, It's Fine. It's for parents of teens with self-destructive behaviors. And if you go to youronfireitsfine.com, you can get a free first chapter of the book so you can test drive it, see if you resonate with it, and grab more of it if it means something to you.
I love that title too.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I think this is, an incredibly important topic and it's scary. And so we don't often talk about it. And it is so important. And a lot of the themes you talked about are things that apply in so many ways, right? I heard you talk about the importance of parents regulating their own emotions and working on their own skills. I heard you talk about empathy and validating as preventive and also meeting your child in those really hard moments. And trusting your instinct when you're concerned is, something we didn't explicitly talk about, but I heard come through in some of what you were saying. So important. Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me into the conversation. I appreciate it.
That's it for this episode. I am so glad you found your way here. And remember, even if you're on your own, you don't have to do it alone. You've got this.